guys, what's going on? Welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, I want to share with you guys how to grow your string of hearts to make it look nice and long, full, and lush like this guy over here. And also share with you guys a bit of my secrets and the common questions I often get. So what I want to cover in this video is a little bit about the string of hearts, the structure of it, the make of it, how to care for it. We're going to cover everything from the lighting requirements, the watering, the soil medium, and the different propagation methods. So without further ado, let's get started. So a little bit about this plant. This was discovered back in the 1800s, also called the Sarapegii woodii, chain of hearts, string of hearts, rosary vine. And it is a vining succulent plant with its strong vines right here, typically known to have heart-shaped leaves that is a little bit variegated with its dark green and silver tones to it. The underleaf has a bit of purple shade that you guys see here. It will bloom during the summer and fall months that you guys see here. The blooms kind of look like a little bit of a vase that has 5 little petals at the tip right there. And it will also produce these aerial tubers, these white balls that you guys see here. These typically grow from the node, which is where the two hearts meet together, and eventually grow. So there are different sizes that you guys can see here. That is a great sign that your string of hearts is healthy along with the blooms. And it is a beautiful plant, well known in the plant community. There are different variations of it. There is a variegated string of hearts, even though this is still somewhat variegated with its green and silver tones on the leaf. The variegated kind is a little bit more of the pink, purple, and white color to it that you guys see here. So I do have a variegated kind which is a little bit smaller than this one. So I've had this plant for about 2.5 years, almost 3 years now. And when I first got this plant, it was in a 6-inch container. It still is. I have never repotted this guy. However, when I did first get him, he wasn't that long. It was obviously only up to here. And you guys can see here an old footage of it. And the leaves and the vines were a little bit more sparsed out. Unlike today where you guys can see that there's a lot of vines here. The hearts are really packed together, making it look a little bit more full. And I'm going to share with you guys how I did that. And to be honest, it's going to come down to your basic care needs. So first of all, we'll talk about the lighting. This guy requires a lot of bright indirect light, whether you have it indoor or outdoors. It needs a lot of bright indirect light. So no direct sunlight because the leaves will burn. However, keep in mind, I have a south-facing window, a large south-facing window, and I have this guy maybe about like 8 to 10 feet away from it, still in the same location. You guys can see right here. I'm standing next to this guy. When I'm looking at the window, I can see the view of the sky. That tells me this is getting a lot of bright indirect light. Now, say for example, the plant is still here and you got a large window or a small window, but there's trees around or buildings. Even though, you know, you consider it as bright light, if there's something blocking the view of the sky from where the plant is standing, that's not getting enough light. So be mindful of where you place your string of hearts, because again, these guys love a lot of bright indirect light. South facing preferred, because that's what I have. East or west is okay as well. But once you start getting to like the north window, I don't recommend it to be in the north facing window. Northwest, northeast can work. However, keep in mind that if you don't have a lot of bright indirect light, the growth rate of your string of hearts, the size of the leaves, and how thick these vines and aerial tubers can get will be dependent on your lighting. So that is definitely the #1 thing. You need a lot of bright indirect light. If you have a small window, you definitely want to make sure that your string of hearts is a little closer to it, so it has a nice good view of that sky. So that is the #1 thing I would say when it comes to the string of hearts is lighting. In addition, you also want to make sure that the light is hitting the top of the pot where the soil is, as well as all the vines where the hearts is, because that is the only way this plant will capture the sun's energy and allow it to grow really nice and thick and full. Now, you guys can see here that the longer this guy gets, the smaller these hearts are. And also, if you notice that strings aren't as even, there's a reason for that. First of all, down here where you guys see, he's not getting a lot of light. He doesn't have as much view of that sky because there's also this stand that's kind of covering it. And so the hearts are a little bit more smaller and they aren't as thick as those are the ones up here. In addition, the reason why one side is a little bit longer than the other is because, again, I only have one side of my wall that has light and windows, so I often have to rotate this guy so that way the other side can also get a bit more lighting. Key is really lighting when it comes to this plant. And you'll notice that some of these hearts right now, there are a bit more of these thicker leaves versus some of these are a little bit more thinner. Again, that's because of lighting. Some of these aren't getting as much light because maybe the other vine is also covering it. So again, lighting is important if you want these hearts to be nice and thick and like firm and big and all of that stuff. The color on the backing of it, that purple shade, also comes from the amount of lighting it gets. So again, lighting is so important for this string of hearts. I cannot stress that enough. Whether you have a small string of hearts that only has a few vines or a large one like this, lighting is definitely going to be the key source of growth for this guy. And if you don't have the ample lighting, like a south-facing window, or even an east and west, or even if you don't have that large of a window. I mean, I don't recommend. If you have to get a grow light, then definitely get a grow light to experiment with it. But I've never put this guy under a grow light, so I can't say how well that would do. But I've also done other plants under a grow light, and they do well. So if you absolutely don't have sufficient lighting in your home and you want a string of hearts, get artificial lighting for it, because it is a beautiful plant. So now let's move on to watering. When it comes to watering your string of hearts, my recommendation is always to water when the soil is completely dry. Because this is a vining succulent or semi-succulent, this does store water in its leaves and in its vines, as well as in its tubers, which is also in the roots. You guys can see right here, this was my variegated string of hearts when I repotted it. The amount of tubers that's in the roots right now, that is where they also store a bit of water. So you want to make sure that the soil is completely dry before watering this plant. When it comes to watering the plant, you want to make sure that there's drainage holes in your container, whether it's a plastic container or in a decorative pot, and you want to make sure that that water drains through. Now, the amount of water you give, as well as when to water it, is going to depend on how big your string of hearts is. So for example, I have a 6-inch string of hearts container, very, very long vines, a lot of roots, a lot of tubers. So this is going to need a lot of water when it does time to water this guy. So I use about 2 watering cans of water to water this guy, and I do it only every 2 weeks, every 2.5 weeks during the summer months, and maybe about every 3 weeks to 4 weeks during the winter months. And the way for me to tell when to water this guy is I go on my schedule of 2 weeks. So for example, it's been 2 weeks. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to find hearts that are a little bit more thicker, not the thin ones, to feel if they are firm or soft. If they're firm, I'm going to wait a few more days. If they are starting to get soft, then I'm going to water it. So I get up on my chair, I get my watering can, I put a bowl underneath, and I water this guy and allow that water to drain through. And then I'm going to fill my can again and do it again one more time. And that should be good for the next 2 weeks during the summer months. And then again, I would repeat that process when it is time to water. I don't recommend sticking a moisture meter into the soil, depending on how mature your string of hearts is. And the reason why is because, again, these has tubers in the roots. I don't want to damage the tubers when sticking that moisture meter. I really just go by feeling the hearts, as well as my schedule of every 2 weeks and every 3 or 4 weeks during the winter months. So again, if you have a smaller string of hearts, you're not going to need a full watering can. You know, if you have a 4-inch, maybe a half of it, allow that water to drain through and place it back. But yeah, so that's when it comes to watering. I actually never have fertilized my string of hearts. People ask me what fertilizer you use. I don't. Honestly, lighting, the watering, the soil it's in, good enough. This guy is thriving really, really well. So when it comes to the soil mixture and the medium I use, this is still in its original soil medium when I first got it, because I've never repotted it. However, I did top this up with a bit of soil every year just to allow some new fresh nutrients within the soil to kind of flow through the pot. However, I have propagated this plant a few times, also repotted my variegated string of hearts, and the medium I typically use is going to be a cacti soil. So I'll probably put about like 60-70% cacti soil, a bit of regular potting mix, like maybe 10%, and then a lot of perlite or pumice to allow extra drainage in there. And you know, if you have, you know, cocoa husk or orchid bark, if you want to get fancy, you can throw that in. But honestly, cacti soil, perlite, pumice, and a bit of a regular potting mix should be good enough. And that's where I have my variegated string of hearts in right now, as well as a few propagation that I've done from this plant. So yeah, very simple, very easy. You don't need to get fancy. Some people put a bit of sand as well to make it a little bit more coarse, because again, vining succulent, so you want to make sure that the medium is well draining. But yeah, so those are kind of the 3 key ingredients when it comes to growing a nice long and full lush string of hearts: lighting, good watering, and then the soil and medium to make sure it's well drainage. Now, the propagation I'm going to talk about is a great technique to make your string of hearts full, partly because if you only have maybe like 3 or 4 vines, or you know, maybe 6 strings, cut them if they're long, get them propagated, get those roots going, plant them back to the top, and now you have like 2 times the amount of vines you originally started with, and you just keep that process going. However, when it comes to propagation as well, there are different methods. So the first propagation method I've done is just taking a few cuttings and creating nodes. The nodes is where these 2 hearts meet that you guys can see here, and I've done a few propagation videos on this channel, so definitely check that out if you guys want a little bit more detail. But create nodes by removing the hearts on each end here, and then placing these guys in water making sure that that node is always submerged in water. Place this cutting in an area that is warm and gets a lot of nice indirect bright light. Allow those roots to grow at least 2 inches before taking these cuttings and planting it back at the top or planting it into a new pot. I often get the question, when should you change the water? And my recommendation is, whenever it's dirty, but the key thing is making sure it's always topped up and that that node is submerged in water at all times, because that is where the roots are going to grow from. Now, when it comes to taking your cuttings and you want to plant it back to the mother plant, I always recommend to just gently get like a chopstick, find an area where, there are no vines there, and kind of just, make a tiny hole, place these cuttings in there, making sure those roots are submerged in soil, and then topping it up with soil. Water your plant if it requires water. Other than that, just take care of it like you normally would have taken care of it. So that was kind of my first method when it comes to doing propagation. The one thing to keep in mind when you cut a vine of any plant, but especially in a string of hearts, is wherever you cut, the vine needs to continue to grow. So what it will typically do is that one vine or one string that you cut, it will split into 2, sometimes 3, like you guys see here. So that is how you also can make this plant really, really thick and full. What was once a one string or one vine can now become 2. In addition, you now have that cutting that you're propagating that you can add back at the top of the mother plant to really create a lot more of this full look. So I propagated this a few times. I cut it, I think, about here, even down here. So that's so you guys can see wherever I cut, it definitely gets a little bit more thicker. So that is definitely a great technique to make your string of hearts have a lot of strings and a lot of vines to just make it look full. You cut, you propagate, you root those in water, plant it back at the top, you split these vines, and repeat that process to really create this effect. But another method of propagation is also taking these aerial tubers that you guys see right here. There's 2 methods that you guys can do. One is still attached to the mother plant. So simply take this tuber, plant it into soil, and while it's still attached to the mother plant, wait for it to root before snipping it off. Or you guys can take these aerial tubers, just cut it and plant it directly into soil. Or what you guys can also do is take these aerial tubers after cutting it and place it in water for the roots to grow. You guys can see here I have both. One planting it directly into soil, and this one I'm rooting it in water, and it's grown so much roots, so ready to be planted back into soil. And yeah, so that is another method to definitely propagate your string of hearts. Really, really easy. So aside from the pothos, I would say the string of hearts is really easy to cut and propagate, and because of this technique, it does create more of this nice long and full string of hearts. So I always encourage, if you guys have a long vine or long string and you only have like 3 or 4, cut that guy into pieces, propagate it, and double up on your string of hearts. Now here's a bonus technique if you guys want to create this nice full and long look. In addition to the lighting, the watering, the propagation, and the soil medium, is if you have your string of hearts tangled up all together and like really bunched up, and if you can, I would recommend to gently untangle them. And the reason being is because you want to make sure that each of these vines has the opportunity to capture as much light as possible. When they are sitting on top of each other, it's blocking the sunlight on some of these strings and some of these hearts, which again goes back to how important lighting is for this guy. So if you can untangle them, do it. I spent about an hour and a half when I first got this untangling it, and even now once in a while I'll spend time just untangling, just to make sure that each string and each heart has a bit of opportunity and chance to capture that sunlight that it's getting. And again, rotating this guy every week and whatnot, just to keep it a bit more even. So that's also another tip. But yeah, so there you guys have it. That is how I grow and care for my string of hearts. If you guys have any other questions about this particular plant, comment below and let me know. Other than that, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and we'll see you guys soon. Peace.